You're listening to the first episode of 2021, and a year to remember for really long is now past us. Needless to say, 2020 remarkably changed the way we live forever. I'm sure it wasn't easy at all for many of us. However, thanks to the technology at our disposal, we were still able to make things work. Just imagine living in a pandemic without the internet that immensely helped in disseminating information about the virus across borders. Or video calls that still kept us connected with our dear ones, remote working technologies that kept the business going, and the medical research and technologies that made it possible to develop vaccines in such record time. More importantly, 2020 forced us to spend more time with ourselves. To some degree, it came as a blessing that we need not take those early morning long commutes to the office or get stuck for hours while our way back. We suddenly realized that we have much more time saved for ourselves. But considering the social being we are, we still crave for human connections, and traveling and commuting is bound to rebound once the pandemic is past us. But are there any permanent solutions to this? Do millions of people around the globe really need to spend hours commuting every single day? The answer perhaps is no, they don't.
Welcome to Tech Me to the Future, our podcast about technology, innovation, and their impact on society and human behavior. Please welcome your host, Mayang Sanchetti.
Our guest today on the show is Tanay Manjrekar. He is a Pune boy who made history on November 9th, 2020 by being one of the first people ever to ride in a Hyperloop on a system he helped build himself. Tanay joined Virgin Hyperloop in 2016 and currently leads the technical development of their next-gen power electronic system. Tanay, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Parag. Happy to be here.
Tanay, can you explain what is a Hyperloop and how does it work?
Sure. So Hyperloop, it's very different from what you've seen today as being developed as a mass transit system. Hyperloop is something totally new. We are pitching it as the fifth mode of transport. And what it actually is if you've seen our videos, you would notice that there is kind of a tube in which pods travel at really high speed. Now, these pods, what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of packetize mass transit systems in the sense that these pods travel independently from each other and they travel in an enclosed environment. There are a couple of technical reasons for that. So why we create the tube and the structure in which the pods travel is to reduce air friction and to give us efficiency. I can give an analogy of so the pressure that we operate at inside the tube, that is similar to what you would see at around 200,000 feet high in the sky. So airplanes basically travel at around 35,000 feet or something around about there. This is way, way higher. And that is a key for us to actually attain that efficiency, which is why we create that controlled environment with the tube. So this is still on the ground. It can be through tunneling, or it can just be like another lane on a freeway. But that's how the structure will look like. And inside the tube, inside the space, we would have pods that are, I would say around, for a passenger product, it's around 28 to 30 people. That is the capacity for a pod, and there are cargo pods as well. So these pods would be traveling at somewhere around 600 miles an hour in these tubes, and they travel independently. So it's not really like a train where you have multiple pods attached to each other. This is more about making that experience for people kind of on demand, which is when you enter, say, a Hyperloop portal, you can just sit in the pod and then one pod just moves away and the next one comes in the next few minutes, right? So it is giving back people that the enjoyment in travel. And then the other aspect, if I was to just move away towards the technical side of it, it works on electric propulsion. So this is not like there are no direct emissions over here. It is completely electric. That's basically what I work on. It's super fun, the technology that we're developing. Sustainability is kind of a key factor for us when you're designing the technology that we don't just want to implement right now, but it should be there for the next decades as we go along. So making sure that our footprint in terms of construction is small, and then also to make sure that it's a zero direct emissions technology. I think that is where we focus on.
Fascinating. So it's pretty much like a capsule sliding in a small tunnel, which can apparently reach the speed of somewhere about 1,000 km/h. So you were one of the first person and first Indian to ever travel in this Hyperloop. How did it feel when you entered the pod, the door shut, you sat on the seat, fastened the seat belt, and the operator called out 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, launch?
It was incredible. I mean, I was on such an emotional trip the whole time. This like emotions were running high. It was really like for me. Even though I was there in the pod, I at every point of time kind of knew that this is what so many people have worked relentlessly over the past 5 to 6 years to create, and I was getting to experience it firsthand. So the ride down the tube was really just a trip down memory lane, because we started building up the system out in the open air and then kind of integrated itself into what it is now. So for me, when we went down the countdown, I was ridiculously excited. I mean, I look at those videos now and I just laugh at my expressions.
Absolutely. I think in the videos you looked exhilarated. So tell me a little bit more about your background, Tanay. How did you end up from Pune to Los Angeles and doing what you are doing right now?
I've lived in Pune for about 23 years. I love that place. I grew up over there and I studied throughout in Pune itself. That's where I completed my bachelor's. And after I got done with my bachelor's, I was thinking about, well, what to do next. And pretty much around at that time during the final year, I read this paper from Elon Musk, the first white paper for Hyperloop, and that just captivated me. I didn't specifically think that I would be working on a Hyperloop, but like literally even in the statement of purpose that you like send as an application, I had written that I want to work on a technology like the Hyperloop, something just right at the cutting edge of technology. And from there onwards, I ended up at USC. I did a master's in electric power, so that's more towards grid scale power rather than specifically transportation. But then when I was studying at USC during the final year, I basically did an internship with Hyperloop, with Virgin Hyperloop. And the first project that I worked on over here was our propulsion open-air test. So this was back in 2016.
And how old was Virgin Hyperloop then when you joined as an intern?
Sure. So I think it was around or just barely 1 year old. There were around 80 people in the company. So it was really, really small. We were just out there in the desert kind of building this thing up. So for me also, that was my first like real world experience of, well, you've learned all of the engineering, you've sat in classes and learned all of this, now you get to apply it. And then also the responsibilities that I was given at that time were pretty fantastic. I wasn't expecting to be just overloaded with so many things, but that helped me grow a lot during that period. And then after POT, I basically just came back. There was no way how I was going anywhere else. Started as an electrical engineer, working right after I graduated. And then from that point onwards, I was working at what we call DevLoop. So DevLoop is our full-scale test site. So we have 0.5 kilometer of tube over there, which is the enclosed structure that I was mentioning. And then we have a couple of pods that we designed that we have tested out over there. So initially, for me, my responsibilities are more towards kind of literally just building out the entire hardware for the control systems, because the tube is kind of a kilometer away from where the control system and the brain of the propulsion system sits, and to integrate all of those things to create sensors on the pod so that we know exactly what is happening on the pod. All of that hardware was what I developed for about 1 year or so. And then once we actually installed it, got it up and running, it was time to kind of sit in the control room and press the buttons and make the magic happen. So that is a pretty awesome experience, because I think we ended up doing around 400 to 500 tests over there.
Wow.
And it's fun that it was just as exciting when the pod moved like by an inch the first time. It was a very good exercise in just making sure that our design practices are absolutely up to the mark, because no one in the company would want to have anyone in there in a session that they don't think is safe. So that is what we really worked upon, was our safety, integrity of the system. And there was a lot of analysis, a lot of documentation, a lot of those kind of things, after which we kind of got it evaluated by a third-party assessor. And then that was Project Pegasus. For Project Pegasus, not only did I get to actually do all of these things related to safety for the propulsion system, but at the end of it, I got to ride it as well. So
Very interesting. Tanay, one question. The concept of VAC train was already proposed back in 1904 by Robert Goddard. And you mentioned that you got your inspiration from Musk, who wrote his paper about Hyperloop Alpha
Yep.
in 2013. Why did it take so long to commercialize the technology behind Hyperloop? And especially when Hyperloop 1 was developing, did you have sufficient materials in terms of engineering know how in order to build?
So there are a couple of things out there, right? Like this technology, at the end of the day, it is first principles based physics, right? That doesn't change. So even like if you conceptualize it in the 1900s, and then at that time, just based on what my understanding is that the resources, like other things, were not really ready for the technology in terms of say computation power and you could talk about say manufacturing processes and like mechanical tolerances, etc. Definitely at that point of time, we didn't have those sophisticated technologies available for us to actually implement it at a very large scale. Right now, what has changed is obviously, I mean, just if you look at Moore's law, the tech just keeps increasing exponentially, right? So I think in terms of actually developing it and getting those concepts to a much more realizable up to scale version of that technology, this is probably a great time. I mean, we're still, to be fair, we are still kind of pushing the boundaries of everything that we're using. And that is why we have to do all of these tests, right? It's still, I mean, if you think about power electronics, if you think about a battery system or even the civils and construction or computation, you're pretty much just on the boundaries of all of these technologies. So we have to work with manufacturers to understand what the capabilities are. At the same time, as you mentioned, the system looks a bit different from, say, what it was envisioned before, and then also how it is written out in the alpha paper, because that was based on air bearings. And the reason for that is that once you actually take it up and go through the process of, well, what is actually feasible and what makes more sense, then you can kind of narrow down your options kind of based on iterative trade studies. So if you look at our development right now, definitely like when we started off, we didn't have all of the answers, right? But then a good way of looking at a pretty complicated problem is to break it down into pieces. So that's why the incremental kind of development of first building out just the propulsion system in open air and then putting it in a tube kind of breaks down that problem. Well, once you put it into a tube, let's first just make the pod work properly and make sure that we understand it correctly before you even think about putting people in there. It's that kind of long-term vision which helps you take a project from like just blueprints to its actual implementation. So I think
Makes sense. Were there any challenges in order to make this technology a reality? Were there any moments of inflection point where the team felt that, hey, this is it, this is not going to work. We did our best, but hey, we don't have sufficient technology or prowess to make it happen?
yes, there were a lot of challenges. There were a lot of challenges, and at the end of the day, we were like, "Oh, this is so difficult." But at the same time, I think the resilience in the team is what has made it possible, right? To just show up the next day and just keep working at it until you can solve it. I think that is really what has enabled us to kind of get to here. Every day, there's a new little problem or a little challenge that you need to solve, and usually it is also like with multiple teams together. So folks that are working over here are really open-minded, and they kind of we have large brainstorm sessions to look at it when we have complicated problems. And then every single time those challenges arise, it's like, okay, how can we get through with this, right? I mean, sure, there have been days when we've been like, oh, this is just too difficult. But then I think we go to sleep, we get up the next day, and then show up and okay, let's have at it again. I think that attitude helps.
Absolutely. And that's how life works. Let's talk about how is it better than other modes of transportations, and let's compare it with the airplane. I know the speed of an hyperloop is almost double that of an airplane. What about some of the other attributes such as safety, cost,
Sure.
convenience, etc.?
Mhm. Sure. So, I mean, I don't know about air travel, but I honestly hate it. I don't know about you.
I hate the point until which you need to get into the airplane because of the entire hassle of baggage clearance and then queuing in airport and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, so when we are looking at Hyperloop, right, as a technology, we do take into consideration that this is not only supposed to be something that's fast, but like from an endpoint, from a user experience, we're also designing the portals ourselves. And exactly what you mentioned right now is like the hassle of getting into a plane. That's basically where we end up. That's the boring part of an air flight, right? Of an air journey. We're taking care of that from the way how we're designing the portal itself. Since we just have an open canvas, it's like we can paint it the way we want to right now, which is a great advantage for us. And all of those things are obviously taken into consideration. Now, if you were to just purely compare a pod with an airplane, there are actually a bunch of similarities over there. An airplane is actually flying high up in the sky in a low pressure or 35,000 feet, for instance, right? It is similar to what we're doing right now as we are kind of getting all of the air out of that enclosed space. But the key difference over there is that, well, we're getting more of the air out of the space. So it's a little more efficient than, way more efficient, honestly, as compared to airplanes. It is electric. That's not what we have today in the form of airplanes. So with respect to the environment, it's a lot more environment friendly. And then if you were to look at the pod, it's actually similar to the fuselage of an airplane, because you still have a pressurized capsule with seats just as you would have in an airplane, with all of the life support systems that you need in an airplane. But then the end-to-end experience is way different. In terms of, say, safety, for instance, in a plane, if something goes wrong, you're pretty much right up over there and you need to land a plane. For us, that environment is a lot more controlled. There are less number of variations, right? You don't have turbulence. People won't lose their sleep when the plane just starts shaking, because a Hyperloop will be a lot more smooth because we are controlling the environment that we're moving in. So those are kind of the key differences in airplanes.
So let's talk about the cost part of it. How costly is it to build the entire Hyperloop?
The one thing that I would kind of like to stress on is that this is supposed to be a mass transit system, right? If you're designing a product and if it is not affordable and if it is not accessible to people, it's not going to be a mass transit system, period, right? That's just as simple as it gets. Now, I don't really have absolute numbers for you. I'm not from business dev. So from an engineering perspective, what I would say is that the cost is reduced because of the higher efficiency in the pods, etc. Right, so those things help with respect to the cost. And if you're looking at a price point, it's basically going to be a price that is comparable and competitive with all of the other modes of ground transport, for instance. That right, so that is like we understand that like no one's going to ride a Hyperloop if it is not affordable, right? That's just not going to be a mass transit system.
That's good to hear. So there are two types of pods that you guys are working on. One is the passenger pod, and the second one is the cargo pod. In the paper that Elon wrote, he also mentioned about a passenger plus vehicle pod. For example, I would just take my car, go to the station or the portal that you call, enter the entire capsule, and then move to different parts of the city or a different city altogether, and then get my car out. So the entire process, I don't really need to even get out of my car. So is that something that your team is planning to work on as well?
So not specifically that aspect of it itself. Like we're not really working on trying to create something that operates like a ferry boat where you can drive your car and then it goes on to the other side. What we're working on is passenger pods, cargo pods, and maybe a mix of that. And this really depends on what kind of business case you're looking at, or like what kind of utility in terms of like who exactly is using it. If it is something in between cities where there's a lot of people movement, then the pods might just be purely passenger pods. With like, say, a little bit of storage space for the passengers. If it is something that is like a port connector where you want to say, take all of the containers and everything, packetize them and move the ports inland, then it would be a cargo pod. And if you're looking at recently, we also did some studies with airport connectors. So that's a pretty interesting concept where you could basically connect an airport that is inside the city. So this is with the Bangalore airport, for instance, in India. If you could connect the airport that is inside the city, if you connect it to a new airport that is far away, where you basically connect two airports and make them a single terminal, right? Like it's as good as just switching a terminal. And in that case, you might see a combination of, I would say, like a passenger and a cargo pod because people have luggage.
Got it. Well, I'm really pleased that you're discussing about getting this Hyperloop in Bangalore. I stayed in Bangalore for a year, and it was a nightmare to actually travel all the way to the Bangalore airport. It used to take more than 2.5 hours, and if it started raining, God knows what will happen. I've missed 2 flights already when I was in Bangalore.
Think about it. If you could do that travel that took you 2.5 hours and 10 to 15 minutes, that would just change the game, right? I mean, Bangalore, so many of my friends and back home, and I mean, in Bangalore, they keep cribbing about the traffic every single time I call them. this would change so much for them. Like, I mean, when we first even discussed this whole Bangalore thing and it was public, my dad called me up, and he was like, you know how much that would have changed if this was there 10 years ago, because I could come back home like 2 hours earlier. I'm like, huh.
Was that a proud moment for you?
Yeah. I mean, for sure.
I have one skepticism about this, Tanay, and please try to break that up. Back in the days, we were very fascinated about the Maglev train, the bullet train, which used to be the fastest one, which apparently is still one. And for the first time when I went to Shanghai, I knew that I wanted to try it. I planned to take the Maglev train from the city to the airport because there are only two terminals. One is in one part of the city and the other one is at the airport. But it took me longer using the maglev train compared to if I would have taken a cab directly to the airport, because that station in the city is in one corner of the city and is not connected across. And this is the case with everyone. So it felt like the maglev train is like a new museum where people just come here for the experience but are not using it as a mass transit mode of transport.
So, I mean, you actually make a very good case of why Hyperloop is better than the Maglev system on the description that he just gave, right? And as I said, I mean, that is what we're looking at with respect to, say, portal design. If you only solve the problem of getting from point A to point B quickly, that doesn't solve the entire story for people, right? Because it just doesn't. So how we're designing the portals is actually to integrate with a bunch of these different last mile solutions, which can get you to there. And then once you reach a portal, so that experience for customers, it needs to be seamless. What actually, if you have to change kind of 10 different things along the way, and then you get to your destination, that is what makes it cumbersome. If the whole experience can be a lot more seamless, that would change the user experience. And as I said, I mean, it's not really only about speed. I know that Hyperloop can go up to 1,000 kilometers and more than that, but in an actual implementation, you might actually see the speed to be lower than that because it makes more sense for that particular given route.
So is it fair to assume that the convenience part would be very similar to what we have in case of, let's say, an MRT or a subway or a metro?
Kind of similar, but then it would be a little more different than that, in the sense that, well, for subways or for MRTs as well, depending on where you are, obviously the frequency of when these trains come is different, right? When you actually packetize it, what that means is that you're never really worried about getting late by 5 minutes for like your subway, and then you need to wait for 20 minutes, right? It is more just on demand in terms of like you should just be able to go and walk. And at any point of time, you would see a pod with like 20, 25 people or something zooming away, but then the next one will be right next to it, almost ready to go.
Awesome. That's really good to hear. Let's talk about a little bit around the in-house experience. Definitely, this is one of the next gen mode of transportation, and the traveler experience should also be a world class. What are your plans around that?
Yeah. I mean, definitely, you would see we have a team. So passenger experience, we have an entire team for that. And one of the passengers, so Sarah Lucian, and she is the director of passenger experience, who traveled in the Hyperloop as well, along with us. And she heads the team which looks at what do people basically do when they're inside the pod. What is the experience like to get into a pod, right from ticketing until what you do inside a pod? Can you like LED screens and all of the fancy things that you would see today, you would get to see them in the pods. And I mean, some of those renderings are already there in the videos that you would get to see. Also, I think in one of the pods that we showcased in Dubai, you would get to see some of like the seating arrangements and the kind of media experience that you would get inside. It is a key aspect for us, right? Like, I mean, I can keep talking about technology and the awesomeness of the technology, but at the end of the day, you're serving customers who want a good experience when they're traveling. So that is definitely a key factor, and it doesn't really help to think about that after you build the system. If you think about it right from the get-go, then you can get started and integrate it with the rest of the structure itself and architecture.
Very exciting, Tanay. I'm already sold. A very obvious question. When do we expect this technology to be available for the public?
I mean, much sooner than you expect. So I took a ride in it, so it's already there, right? But then, I mean, going forward with respect to commercialization, I would say, I don't know if you heard about it or no, but in the next around by 2025, that's our target to get our new facility called Hyperloop Certification Center in West Virginia up and running, and get both certified by 2025. So that's in the next 5 years, we would basically get signatures from regulators and governments that this is the system that we can deploy anywhere in the world. And from that point onwards, I think there are quite a few contenders right now to get the first Hyperloop. I'm hoping it's in India. By the end of this decade, I think definitely we will see an actual deployment, and you can get to ride a Hyperloop.
One personal question, Tanay. In this world where everyone is craving for instant gratification, how does it feel to work on something which will take half a decade or one to come to fruition?
That is true. It does get difficult at times when you're working on long-term projects, but then you kind of need to have the vision aligned with what core values you have. At least for me personally, that is how I look at what I'm doing right now. It is something that is really, really transformative. So 10 years down the line, this will have a huge impact on people. So it is fine if like you don't get the instant gratification throughout the way. But I mean, moments like Pegasus, moments like DevLoop, moments like Boat, those are all of the things that kind of make it worth it, right? And then just the fact that for me personally to get to solve all of these challenges on a day-to-day basis, I mean, there's nothing more engaging for me. But the amount of work that is needed to get this up and running is the reason why it takes that long. It's a very complicated problem, but we have the right team in-house to actually build this out. So those are the things, and the people basically make me go. If at any point of time, if like I'm feeling a little low or something, you just need to look at the person to the right of you, to the left of you, and they cheer you up, right? So that is, I think, how we've been functioning.
I'm sure the wait is worth it. More importantly, now that I think of, it's not just going to change the way we commute, but it's also going to change the way we live around it. You have lived in Pune. A lot of people frequent almost daily from Pune to Bombay, take that 2.5 hour ride one way. And all of these are going to change. So what are the couple of things that you envision yourself in terms of how this technology of transportation would change the way we live?
If you think about it, right, you could break it down into all of the different aspects that this is touching. From, I would say, from an industry perspective or from logistics and cargo, this would change a lot, right? Today, you know, as you mentioned, it's awesome to order something online and get it at your doorstep in 2 days. I think that process could be even increased further, right? So it does bring in convenience for everyone in terms of, say, logistics or just cargo in general. The other thing that I think is like for every person, I guess the story would be a little different in that sense, but it would definitely be a story for everyone. Because people travel right now for work, people travel to, in India specifically, I would say I've done the travel myself so many times because half of my relatives stay in Mumbai and half of my relatives stay in Pune. And that's like a common thing for anyone who lives in Pune, Mumbai, right? So we do end up traveling so much back and forth. That this would just fundamentally change the entire game, right? Like you could go and have, and if you're living in Pune, you can like go to Juhu Chowpatty, have a nice sunset, and then come back. That is really dynamically like just changing how we live. And then also the other thing that we think would happen is that it would actually create mega regions. Like I'm just giving you one example. Pune doesn't have a port. Mumbai has a port. If it's only half an hour away, it's as good as Pune has a port, right? So those kind of things would drastically change what kind of opportunities people have in those regions. If you think about large-scale projects, like if you could actually extend it all around India, then something similar to like the Golden Quadrilateral. When you build it out, initially, even you can't comprehend what exactly would this affect, right? But it brings a transformative change throughout the region, and it changes how we live, how we work, and how we actually interact with each other.
It's really a game changer, and I'm looking forward to actually riding in one very soon, probably from Bombay to Pune or from Bangalore airport to Bangalore city. Tanay, it was a delight talking to you. Thanks a lot for joining in.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It was a great conversation. Enjoyed it.
To my listeners, I'm glad that you made it until the end, and I hope you enjoyed listening to the episode. I'll be publishing one episode every 2 weeks, at least for now, which means that you'll have one new episode every alternate week, mostly on Wednesdays. Of course, till the time guests are willing to come on the show and talk to me, and I have few listeners, however modest in number. So, please subscribe and follow the show on whichever podcasting platform you use to get notified about all the new episodes. Cheers and a very happy new year.